Let's get updates from Russia's invasion of Ukraine now. Russia's defense ministry says Ukraine has returned 101 prisoners of war from territories controlled by Kiev following talks. Video published by the Russian defense ministry shows ex-prisoners of war boarding a bus. Officials say they are very emotional and looking forward to meeting their families. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff says 100 troops and 1 civilian had been returned. Earlier this month, Mr. Zelensky confirmed that since the start of the conflict last February, Ukraine has secured the release of 1,762 men and women from Russian captivity. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov is confident that Western countries will supply fighter jets to Kyiv to help fight Russia's invasion. Speaking at an interview in Brussels, Mr. Reznikov noted that Ukraine's allies had already ended up providing a range of Western weapons systems after initially saying they will not do so. He says fighter jets are needed as part of a broader system of air defenses to protect Ukraine from Russian attacks.
If they will start a real offensive campaign, certainly they will use aircrafts from their side trying to stop our defense forces, and they will dominate in the sky. That means it's a real threat. That's why we need more sophisticated, more modern aircrafts to stop them, to defeat them, to deter them. And we have to dominate in Ukrainian sky. With the Minister of Justice, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and special agency, and with the lawyer. I continue to discuss it with my partners, my colleagues, Ministers of Defense. And I'm a little bit joking that in my wish list to Santa, I have some points, and I would say that probably fighter jets is the last point, because we have artillery systems 155, we have MLRS systems, different types with the HIMARS, we have infantry fighting vehicles or armed personal carriers, we have man battle tanks, and we need aircrafts. And you know that it's in interest of the NATO allies, because we have a lot of different types of modern systems, as artillery, armed infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, etc., etc. It means that it's a good level of interoperability between Ukrainian armed forces or defending forces and NATO allies. We became the member of NATO de facto. After this war, after our victory, we became the member of NATO de jure. I'm sure, I'm confident, because it's in the interest of NATO allies.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his priority for the near future is to hold off Russian attacks, brace for their escalation, and get ready for an eventual Ukrainian counter-offensive. Russia rained missiles across Ukraine on Thursday and struck its largest oil refinery, while the head of the Wagner mercenary group predicted the long-besieged city of Bakhmut would take weeks, if not months, to fall.
I held a meeting at headquarters, and all the commanders of operational areas took part in it. We heard in detail about the situation in each of the areas and the prospects for each of the operational areas. Weapon supplies, ammunition supplies, training of our military, enemy plans and capabilities, potential of Ukrainian response, holding the situation at the front and preparing for any escalatory steps of the enemy is a priority for the near future. Moving forward with the further liberation of our land is a priority we're carefully preparing.
And in a show of solidarity with Ukraine, British Labour leader Keir Starmer has met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The Labour Party leader met the Ukrainian president after a visit to Irpin and Bucha on the capital's outskirts, where numerous atrocities, including killings, were documented in the aftermath of the Russian withdrawal. Labour currently holds a lofty lead in opinion polls over the incumbent Conservatives for the UK's next general election due next year. Meanwhile, Mr. Starmer promised that British support for Ukraine would remain unchanged if his party came to power. He said he wanted to show support for Ukraine's calls for justice and reparations for Russian actions during the war.
It and appreciate just how awful it was. It's incredible to see the evidence of atrocities that I've seen this morning. Photographs of civilians in the outskirts of Kyiv, blindfolded and with their arms tied behind their back, shot in the head. Evidence here of residential blocks that were targeted and, families affected so deeply by this. And it's very important for me to be here in Ukraine with the people of Ukraine, making clear that support for Ukraine in the United Kingdom is united, making it absolutely clear that should there be an election next year and a change of government, the position on Ukraine will remain the same. But also not just showing our support for the conflict, which of course we must show, but also joining with them in their cause for justice. There has to be justice for this. There has to be justice in The Hague, and there has to be proper reparation and the rebuilding of Ukraine. So throughout the conflict, the Labour Party has stood united with the government in the United Kingdom to show our support for Ukraine. And we will have an election next year. And there may well be a change of government. And I'm here to talk to President Zelensky later on, to talk to the people of Ukraine and make it absolutely clear that should there be a change of government next year in a general election, there will be no change in the position of support for Ukraine, both during the conflict and in the cause for justice, which is going to be so desperately needed afterwards.
Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen has met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as well in Kyiv in the first such visit since Russia's invasion last year, and offered support for a Ukrainian peace initiative at the United Nations next week. Israel has condemned the Russian invasion of the country, but it has limited its assistance to Kyiv to humanitarian aid and protective gear. Israel's foreign minister adds that he's proud to stand with Ukraine in the face of these challenging times.
I have shared with Foreign Minister Kulba that Israel will support Ukraine peace initiative at the UN next week. My visit here in Kiev today is another testimony of our ongoing support to the Ukraine people. I am proud to stand with Ukraine in the face of these challenging times, and Israel is committed to continuing our support in the months and year ahead. We are going to support and help approve a guarantee up to $200 million for Israeli project in healthcare and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine.
In the meantime, world leaders are gathering for the Munich Security Conference, with French President Emmanuel Macron expected to address the annual summit. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, US Vice President Kamala Harris, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, China's top diplomat Wang Yi, and NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg will also be attending the three-day conference. The event, which begins today, is expected to focus heavily on the war in Ukraine as the first anniversary of Russia's February 24th full-scale invasion approaches. Delegates will also discuss the far-reaching global impacts of the war on issues ranging from energy supply to food prices. Let's bring in expert on international relations theory, Dapo Thomas, who joins us, who will be speaking to us virtually from the Lagos State University, LASU, here in Lagos. Thank you for joining us today on the program. Okay, please kindly unmute yourself, Mr. Thomas. Right, thank you for joining us today. World leaders are gathering in Germany for the Munich Security Conference in 2023, where the war in Ukraine tops the agenda. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said the German Leopard tanks will be in Ukraine at the latest in the last week of March. Do you see more Russian offensive coming the way of the Ukrainians in the wake of this support?
Well, that's the problem you have. You do not have control over logistics, maybe and supply. Not have that control. It takes time. And then that delay is exploited by your opponent, your adversary. I think that is what Russia is doing. You know, that meantime, before all this delivery starts taking place, let us capacitate their energy infrastructure to minimum or to whatever level we can. By the time their deliveries are coming, it will have been fait accompli for some of the things that we want to do. We will have achieved some of the goals that we have to achieve. The only thing now, unfortunately, there is nothing that can be done, even by the NATO allies who are giving the weapons, because some of these weapons are so advanced, so sophisticated that you need some training. And if you don't go through the training and then you collect the weapons or the equipment, how do you know how to use it? How do you know how to maintain? So these are some of the things, these are some of the problems, logistics, that will count against the Ukrainians. But I believe that before March, when they start receiving these deliveries, it depends on how much they have learned about they have learned so much they can recover everything that they have lost because of waiting for the delivery.
So similarly, the U.S. administration had also announced last week that it intended to bolster Kyiv's fight against Russia's invasion by sending fighting vehicles. Lithuania, on the other hand, followed suit by sending automatic anti-aircraft cannons that can target and take down enemy planes, drones, helicopters, and what have you from a distance of up to 5 kilometers. Are these all morale boosters for Ukraine or war tactics?
I didn't get you clearly. The thing was crappy.
Okay, I was asking you if,
all these supplies.
Yeah, all these supplies, do you think they are morale boosters for Ukraine, or are they war tactics, or specifically, do you think they're a way of funding the war?
Well, I don't know how. It depends on how the Ukrainians put the weapons into use. I do not see any escalation for as long as there is no encroachment of any allied territory by the Russians. Whatever they give to the Ukrainians, and I'm so sure that there will be some instructions to guide to guide the use of some of these weapons, particularly the advanced ones. The ones with advanced systems, because it's very dangerous if you now use some of these weapons or some of these aircraft into attacking Russia, inside of Russia, instead of defending or instead of ensuring doing a counter-offensive to make sure that Russia leave your own territory. If you now attack Russia, it's going to be an escalation. So I want to believe that they will abide by some of the instructions that will be given to them by the suppliers, by the donor nations. So I do not foresee the escalation only on these two possibilities. One, the Ukrainians attacking Russia territory, going inside instead of fending off the offensive of Russia within their own territory. Then secondly, if Russia should mistakenly encroach or attack any territory of the allies, so there is likely to be an escalation.
Yes, but Russia has said that, this will elevate the war, about 30 countries or more. providing equipment to Ukraine, says that this will escalate the war and bring more sufferings to Ukraine. What do you make of this, direct, whatever by the Russians, direct comments by the Russians about this?
Now, what does Putin expect if nobody supplies weapons to Ukraine? Because these allies see Ukraine as a victim, and apart from that, a de facto member of the Union, EU, and possibly NATO. And as such, there is nothing they can do than to assist, but they will not join the war. They can actually supply. There is nothing that says you cannot supply. The only difference here is that these supplies are being done in the open. Unlike secret supplies, unlike the supplies that you make when people will not know who is supplying you the arms. But this time, the NATO allies and West and the US, they have brazenly made it clear to Russia that they are with this nation, they are with Ukraine, and there is nothing that stops them from supplying. If nothing stops you, if there is no law that stops you from invading another territory, another sovereign nation, then what law, will count against the NATO allies or West? Or the US for supplying arms? No law. There's no law. If you have already broken some of the international norms and everything, and then you are expecting people to abide by rules. So if he sees them as enemies, they have never hidden the fact that they are his adversaries. They have never hidden the fact that they are against what he has done, and that they are even on alert, red alert for that matter, that in case he does anything to any of their territories, then there will be escalation. They are going to intervene immediately. There is no need for dispute. No need for debate or any kind of dialogue. They are on standby. They are on red alert. So they are already enemies. They have declared themselves as enemies of Russia. So I don't understand what he's saying, that supplying the arms and everything has shown that they are a threat to Russia. Of course, they have not hidden that fact that they are a threat. They are against Russia's incursion into it.
Right, so do you envisage Moscow running short of some army supplies and weapons?
Oh, I do not think so. Ukraine is too small a nation. Just what Russia has in its army. Russia can take 5 wars, 6 wars at a time. So fighting only Ukraine now, I don't think. There is nowhere they are fighting again. They are only occupying some of these areas, but I don't think they are not fighting any war as at now. They are not fighting any other war apart from it. So there is definitely going to be in this disposal. It now depends on what the allies supply to Ukraine and the arrival of those supplies. Because all these things matter, and this is not a war that they have to lose. Because one, it will count against them in so many ways, and it also affect all this struggle of democracy, democracy of the Eastern Europe or wherever. So it's not a war they want to lose. So they have to now strategize on what kinds of weapons, aircraft they will have to supply to Ukraine, and then how some of these things will be. And the Ukrainians are fantastic in terms of training, in terms of getting used to some of the. They have the skills to adapt. They have the skills to understand. They have the understanding of some of these techniques, some of this technology. It doesn't take them much time, and that's why you see them in 1 week, in 3 weeks, in 1 month. They have understood its advanced system, which they have never been used to, have never been accustomed to. But they are fantastic. They have very powerful aerial power. And also, they are very good on land. So I do not think that that would be a problem.
Right.
I think that would be any problem.
Right. Thanks. International Relations Theory expert Dakpo Thomas, thank you so much for coming on the program today. Welcome back to the program. The World Health Organization is increasing its appeal for funding to support Ukraine's damaged health sector, which has suffered attacks since Russia launched its invasion nearly a year ago. WHO Regional Director for Europe, Hans Kluge, describes Ukraine's health system as remarkably resilient, despite sustaining nearly 780 attacks against its healthcare services. He says the country now needs more funds to ensure that mental health services and rehabilitation could be dispensed while ensuring community access to health services.
War makes everyone vulnerable. That's why WHO is coordinating 191 partners, national and international, to deliver various health services right across this vast country, reaching 8.5 million people last year, and we aim to reach together to 13.6 million people with the support this year. Dear ladies and gentlemen, this is not the time to let fatigue win. The latest WHO appeal requires $240 million, $160 million for Ukraine, $80 million for refugee-receiving countries. I'm always amazed every time that despite of the unforgivable attacks of healthcare services, despite the fatigue, the stress and the exhaustion of the health workforce, the health system in Ukraine is still standing. It's a testament to its heroic workforce, sustained political commitment, and consistent budget support for salaries and medicines. What is needed is continued humanitarian support, because unfortunately, after what I saw, I cannot tell that the impact of the war on the health of the people in this country is going to diminish. I'm very concerned it will, in the coming months, actually increase. So, humanitarian focus, number one. Number two, as Dr. Habicht rightly told, recovery. Very important conference in June in London, the recovery. The question sometimes is it time already to speak about recovery? Absolutely yes. I mean, you're working with this country for 15 years on health system reform, health financing, primary healthcare. There is a solid basis. The recovery indeed starts now.
"125 Ukrainian soldiers arrived at a military base, air base outside Madrid today to receive training in Spain. Spain's land army will be in charge of training the 55 Ukrainian soldiers on how to operate the Leopard 2 A4 tanks, which Spain plans to send to Ukraine. The remaining 70 soldiers will be trained in the Toledo Training Coordination Center, a program dedicated to training up to 400 Ukrainian conscripts every 2 months, and which forms part of the European military assistance mission in support of Ukraine. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the United States is ready to defend the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania if required. He also said that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has helped to reinforce NATO.
The United States remains steadfastly committed to the freedom and sovereignty of our Baltic allies. And we stand united with you to deter and defend against any threat to our shared security. Putin thought that he could divide NATO, but his aggression achieved just the opposite. The NATO alliance is more united and stronger than I've ever seen it. And the final thing I would just point out to you is that prior to Russia's invasion, I met with your Minister of Defense, and I told him that if Russia invaded Ukraine, we would deploy forces to Estonia the next day. And we did. We were the first to be here. And we meant every word we said, and we'll live up to our commitments going forward. So we are committed to Article 5, and you can bet on it. So.
Question to Secretary Austin: what should the U.S. and Estonia?
What we're seeing as you've heard me say before, is Russia continue to introduce large numbers of troops into the theater. Those troops are ill-equipped and ill-trained, and because of that, they're incurring a lot of casualties, and we expect that that will continue.